Tonight, we journey through the mists of time to the frozen north, a land of gods, giants, and fate itself. This is the entire story of Norse mythology, told gently from the very beginning. So settle in, let your thoughts drift like snow over Yggdrasil's roots, and allow the sagas of Odin, Thor, Loki, and the 9 realms to guide you softly into sleep. Before Christianity swept across northern Europe, before the Vikings sailed to distant shores, and long before Marvel turned gods into superheroes, there existed a cosmos born from ice and fire, a universe where giants battled gods, where destiny was written in stone, and where the end of all things was not just inevitable, but eagerly anticipated. This is the story of Norse mythology, and tonight we're diving into the very beginning of everything. But to understand how the Norse cosmos came to be, we first need to understand what came before it. Because in the beginning, there was nothing. Not darkness, not light, not even emptiness as we might imagine it. There was Ginnungagap, the yawning void, a gap so profound that it existed before existence itself had meaning. Picture this: no earth beneath your feet, no sky above your head, no stars to guide your way, just an endless, hungry emptiness that stretched in directions that didn't yet exist. But this void wasn't destined to remain empty forever. On either side of Ginnungagap, 2 primordial realms were stirring to life. To the north lay Niflheim, the realm of mist and ice. Here, ancient springs called Elivagar bubbled with poisonous waters that froze as they flowed into the void. Layer upon layer of ice built up, creating massive glaciers that crept slowly toward the center of Ginnungagap. The cold here wasn't just the absence of warmth. It was something alive, something that reached out with crystalline fingers to claim whatever it touched. But to the south burned Muspelheim, the realm of fire and chaos. This wasn't the comfortable warmth of a hearth or the controlled flame of a torch. This was primordial fire, the kind that existed before the rules of physics, before the laws of nature. Sparks and embers danced through the air like living things, and rivers of molten rock flowed toward the great void, meeting the advancing ice in a cosmic collision that would change everything. When fire met ice in the heart of Ginnungagap, something miraculous happened. The ice began to melt, and from those first drops of water, life stirred. Not life as we know it, but something far more ancient and terrible. The drops formed into Ymir, the first giant, a being so massive that his body would one day become the foundation of all the worlds. Ymir wasn't alone for long. As he slept, his body began to generate life. From the sweat under his left arm emerged the first man and woman of giant kind. His legs bred together and produced a 6-headed son. But Ymir needed sustenance, and so the melting ice revealed Audumla, the primordial cow. She licked the salty ice blocks for nourishment, and as her tongue worked across the frozen surface, she began to uncover something unexpected. First, hair appeared in the ice. Then, on the second day, a head emerged, and on the third day, Audumla had licked free an entire man. This was Buri, beautiful and strong, the grandfather of the gods. Buri had a son named Bor, and Bor married Besla, a giantess. From their union came 3 sons who would reshape the cosmos forever: Odin, Vili, and Ve. These 3 brothers looked upon the growing chaos of Ginnungagap and saw opportunity. They saw Ymir, the massive giant whose very existence was flooding the void with endless generations of frost giants, and they made a decision that would echo through all of mythology. They killed him. The death of Ymir was cataclysmic. His blood flowed so freely that it drowned nearly all the frost giants, creating the first great flood. Only one giant, Bergelmir, escaped with his wife by climbing into a chest and floating to safety. From them, all future giants would descend, carrying with them an eternal grudge against the gods who had murdered their ancestor. But the three brothers weren't finished. They took Ymir's massive corpse and began the greatest construction project in cosmic history. They carried his body to the center of Ginnungagap and began to build the world from his remains. His flesh became the earth, rich and fertile. His blood became the seas and lakes. His bones became the mountains, and his teeth and broken bones became rocks and pebbles. The skull of Ymir became the sky itself, held up at 4 points by 4 dwarfs, Nordri, Sudri, Austri, and Vestri, whose names mean north, south, east, and west. The brothers took sparks and embers from Muspelheim and flung them into the sky to become the stars, the sun, and the moon. They gave the sun and moon chariots to race across the heavens, pursued forever by wolves who sought to devour them and bring about the end of days. From Ymir's hair, they created the trees and forests. From his brains, they formed the clouds, and from his eyelashes, they built a protective wall around the realm of men, which they called Midgard, the middle enclosure. This wall would protect humanity from the giants who dwelt in the outer darkness, in the realm called Jotunheim. But the world still felt empty. It had seas and mountains, forests and sky, but it lacked the spark of intelligent life. As the three brothers walked along the seashore of their newly created world, they came upon 2 tree trunks that had washed up on the beach. Some say they were ash and elm, others claim different woods, but all agree on what happened next. Odin breathed into the wood and gave the trees life and spirit. Vili granted them consciousness and the power of movement. Ve gave them the ability to speak, to see, and to hear. From these gifts, the first humans were born, Ask and Embla, the ancestors of all mankind. They were given Midgard as their home, a realm protected by the gods but separate from them. With the world taking shape, the gods needed a place to call their own. High above Midgard, connected by the Rainbow Bridge Bifrost, they built Asgard, the realm of the gods. Here they constructed great halls where they could feast and plan and prepare for the battles to come. The most magnificent of these halls was Gladsheim, where Odin's throne, Hlidskjalf, stood. From this high seat, the Allfather could see into all 9 realms and know what transpired in every corner of creation. But Asgard wasn't just a place of leisure, it was a fortress, because the gods knew that their act of cosmic creation had made them enemies. The giants remembered Ymir's murder and plotted revenge. The forces of chaos that had been present since the beginning still churned at the edges of creation, seeking to unmake everything the gods had built. This tension between order and chaos, between the gods and the giants, between creation and destruction, would define Norse mythology from its very beginning. Unlike many mythologies, where creation is a peaceful, divine act, the Norse cosmos was born from violence and would be sustained by constant struggle. The 9 realms that emerged from this cosmic construction project each had their own character and purpose. Asgard housed the Aesir gods, the primary pantheon led by Odin. Vanaheim was home to the Vanir, another group of gods associated with fertility and wisdom. Alfheim belonged to the Light Elves, beautiful beings associated with light and purity. Midgard, as we've seen, was the realm of humans, connected to Asgard by the Rainbow Bridge. Jotunheim was the realm of the giants, a wild and dangerous place of mountains and forests where the enemies of the gods plotted and schemed. Svartalfheim, also called Nidavellir, was the underground realm of the dwarfs, master craftsmen who would forge many of the most important artifacts in Norse mythology. Helheim was the realm of the dead, ruled by Hel, the half-living, half-corpse daughter of Loki. Here, those who died of sickness or old age would spend their afterlife separate from the warriors who died in battle and earned a place in Valhalla. Muspelheim remained the realm of fire, home to the fire giants led by Surtur, who would one day burn down the entire cosmos. And Niflheim continued as the realm of ice and mist, a cold and dreary place associated with death and the primordial past. All of these realms were connected by Yggdrasil, the world tree, an enormous ash tree whose branches reached into the heavens and whose roots extended deep into the wells of knowledge and fate. This tree wasn't just a cosmic landmark, it was the axis around which all existence turned, the backbone of reality itself. At the base of Yggdrasil lay three wells of tremendous importance. The well of Urd was tended by the three Norns, the sisters of fate who controlled the destiny of gods and men alike. The well of Mimir contained the waters of wisdom and knowledge, guarded by the severed head of the giant Mimir. And the well of Hvergelmir was the source of all cold rivers, the place where the poisonous streams of Niflheim originated. Living in and around Yggdrasil were creatures that would play important roles in the mythology to come. An eagle perched in the highest branches, and a dragon named Nidhugger gnawed constantly at the roots, trying to destroy the tree. A squirrel named Ratatoskr ran up and down the trunk, carrying insults between the eagle and the dragon, stirring up conflict wherever he went. 4 stags bounded through the branches, eating the leaves and representing the 4 winds. Their names were Dain, Dvalin, Dunair, and Durathror, and their constant feeding kept the tree in motion, causing the winds to blow across all the realms. This cosmic tree wasn't static. It was alive, growing, changing, suffering. It groaned under the weight of the worlds it supported. Its leaves rustled with the whispers of prophecy. Deep in its roots, the dragon continued its work of destruction, knowing that one day it would succeed in bringing down the tree and everything it supported. The creation of this cosmos wasn't the end of the gods' work. It was just the beginning. While they had built a world of incredible beauty and complexity, they had also inherited the conflicts and contradictions that had existed since the first meeting of ice and fire. The giants still plotted revenge for Ymir's death. The forces of chaos still pressed at the boundaries of creation. And somewhere in the distance, the howls of wolves could be heard, growing closer with each passing day. The gods knew that their creation was temporary. They had built something magnificent, but they had also set in motion the forces that would one day destroy it. This knowledge didn't paralyze them. Instead, it drove them to live fully, to fight bravely, and to create as much beauty and meaning as possible before the inevitable end. In the halls of Asgard, the gods began to establish the customs and laws that would govern their society. They created the position of the law speaker, built a great judgment hall called Gladsheim, and established procedures for settling disputes. They weren't just powerful beings. They were the architects of civilization itself, creating the templates that humans would later follow in their own societies. Odin, The All-Father, emerged as the leader of this divine community, but his leadership wasn't based on raw power alone. He was the god of wisdom, poetry, war, and death, a complex figure who understood that true strength came from knowledge and cunning as much as from force. He would sacrifice his own eye to drink from the well of Mimir, gaining wisdom at a terrible personal cost. He would hang himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights, piercing himself with his own spear to discover the secrets of the runes. These acts of self-sacrifice revealed something crucial about the Norse understanding of divinity. The gods weren't perfect, immortal beings who existed above struggle and suffering. They were powerful, but they could be wounded, tricked, and even killed. They possessed great wisdom, but they had to work and sacrifice to gain it. They had created the world, but they lived under the shadow of its eventual destruction. This cosmic setup established the fundamental themes that would run through all of Norse mythology: the tension between order and chaos, the value of wisdom gained through sacrifice, the importance of courage in the face of inevitable doom, and the idea that even the gods must earn their power through struggle and loss. The world that emerged from Ymir's body was beautiful but dangerous, ordered but chaotic, permanent but doomed. It was a cosmos that reflected the harsh realities of life in the medieval North, where survival required constant vigilance, where winter could kill the unprepared, and where even the strongest warriors eventually fell in battle. But it was also a cosmos filled with possibility. The gods had created realms of incredible diversity and beauty. They had established the foundations for human civilization. They had built bridges between the worlds and filled the sky with light. Most importantly, they had created a universe where courage mattered, where wisdom was valued, and where even the humblest human could achieve a kind of immortality through heroic deeds. The story of Norse creation wasn't just about how the world came to be. It was about why struggle and sacrifice were necessary, why wisdom was more valuable than strength, and why the knowledge of endings made beginnings more precious. It was a mythology perfectly suited to a people who faced long winters, dangerous seas, and constant warfare, but who refused to let these challenges crush their spirits. As we stand at the beginning of this cosmic story, we can see all the threads that will weave through the tales to come. The conflict between gods and giants that started with Ymir's death will escalate into an eternal war. The wisdom that Odin seeks will lead him into increasingly dangerous situations. The beautiful world created from the giant's body will face threats that grow more serious with each passing age. But we can also see the seeds of heroism, wisdom, and beauty that will flourish in this cosmos. The humans who emerge from Ask and Embla will produce warriors and poets whose deeds will echo through the halls of the gods. The connections between the realms will allow for adventures and alliances that span the entire cosmos. And the very knowledge of Ragnarok, the end of all things, will inspire gods and humans alike to live with greater courage and purpose. The Norse cosmos was complete, but its story was just beginning. In the halls of Asgard, the gods were preparing for the challenges ahead. In Jotunheim, the giants were plotting their revenge. And in Midgard, humanity was taking its first steps toward the heroic age that would define the mythology for generations to come. From ice and fire, from death and sacrifice, from wisdom and warfare, the Norse had built a cosmos that would inspire and terrify, teach and challenge for as long as the stories were told. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the greatest mythological drama in Northern European history was about to unfold. From the cosmic forge of creation, where ice met fire and giants stirred in primordial darkness, the stage was set for something far grander than mere existence. The gods had shaped the worlds, yes, but shaping and ruling are two entirely different endeavors. What emerged from those early divine councils wasn't just order imposed upon chaos, but the establishment of a cosmic government that would define every aspect of existence for gods, humans, and creatures alike. The Aesir, led by the All-Father Odin, didn't simply declare themselves rulers and expect compliance. They understood something fundamental about power that many earthly kings never grasped. True authority flows not from force alone, but from wisdom, sacrifice, and the willingness to bear impossible burdens. Odin's relentless pursuit of knowledge wasn't vanity or curiosity. It was the recognition that to govern the cosmos effectively, one must understand its deepest secrets, even at tremendous personal cost. Consider the weight of omniscience in a universe destined for destruction. Odin knew, with crystalline certainty, that everything he built would eventually crumble at Ragnarok, every alliance forged, every child raised, every victory won was temporary. Yet this knowledge didn't paralyze him with despair. Instead, it galvanized him into action. He gathered the slain warriors, not out of morbid fascination with death, but because he understood that the final battle would require every possible advantage. The establishment of Valhalla represents perhaps the most sophisticated understanding of motivation and reward in all of mythology. The Einherjar, the chosen slain, weren't simply dead warriors granted an afterlife. They were active participants in a cosmic defense strategy. Every day they trained, fought, died, and were reborn, preparing for a war they knew they would ultimately lose. This wasn't punishment or futility. It was the highest form of service, where even death became temporary, in service of a greater cause. But the Aesir's governance extended far beyond military preparation. They established the fundamental laws that would govern reality itself. The concept of oaths, binding and sacred, didn't originate from human culture and ascend to divine recognition. It flowed downward from the gods themselves, who understood that in a universe where words could literally reshape reality, the integrity of one's word became the foundation of all trust and cooperation. The tragic tale of Baldur's death illuminates this perfectly. When Loki orchestrated the death of the most beloved of the gods through trickery and the manipulation of sacred oaths, he didn't just commit murder. He shattered the fundamental trust that held divine society together. The gods' response wasn't merely emotional revenge. It was the cosmic equivalent of a constitutional crisis, where the very principles that governed their civilization had been violated at the deepest level. Frigg's attempt to secure oaths from every living thing to protect Baldur demonstrates the Aesir's understanding of comprehensive governance. She didn't rely on Baldur's strength or skill to protect him. She sought to bind the entire universe in a web of mutual obligation. When she overlooked the seemingly insignificant mistletoe, it wasn't carelessness. It was the inevitable gap that exists in any system, the small, overlooked detail that can bring down even the most carefully constructed order. The binding of Loki after Baldur's death represents one of the most complex moral and political decisions in all mythology. The gods faced an impossible choice: execute one of their own for his crimes, or find a punishment that preserved justice while acknowledging their complicated history together. The solution they chose, binding Loki beneath the earth where serpent venom would drip onto his face for eternity, was neither mercy nor simple vengeance. It was a recognition that some crimes are so fundamental that they require eternal consequences, yet the perpetrator's previous services prevent the ultimate punishment. The establishment of thing assemblies, the governing councils where gods would gather to make collective decisions, shows a sophisticated understanding of shared governance that predates most human democratic institutions by centuries. These weren't ceremonial gatherings where Odin made pronouncements from on high. They were genuine, deliberative bodies where even the All-Father's will could be questioned and challenged. The gods understood that absolute power, even wielded by the wise, inevitably leads to the kind of blindness that destroys civilizations. Thor's role in this cosmic government was equally crucial, though often misunderstood. He wasn't simply the muscle of Asgard, the god called upon when diplomacy failed. Thor represented the principle of active protection, the understanding that some threats require immediate, decisive action rather than contemplation or negotiation. His battles with the giants weren't mindless violence. They were border patrol on a cosmic scale, maintaining the barriers between order and chaos that allowed civilization to flourish. The complexity of Thor's character becomes apparent when examining his relationships with both enemies and allies. His friendship with Loki, despite their fundamental differences, demonstrates the god's capacity for nuanced relationships that transcend simple categories of good and evil. Thor's willingness to travel with Loki on dangerous missions, even while knowing Loki's capacity for betrayal, shows a kind of strategic thinking that values temporary alliances when larger goals are at stake. The hammer Mjolnir itself represents far more than a weapon. It was a symbol of divine authority that could only be wielded by one deemed worthy, but it was also a tool of creation and protection. Thor used it not just to shatter giant skulls, but to bless marriages, consecrate harvests, and restore the dead to life. The hammer's ability to always return to Thor's hand wasn't just convenient magic. It represented the principle that legitimate authority, once properly established, naturally returns to its rightful wielder. The gods' relationship with humanity reveals another layer of their governmental philosophy. Unlike many mythological pantheons, where gods view mortals as either playthings or resources to be exploited, the Norse gods established a complex covenant with humanity. Humans provided worship and sacrifice, yes, but they also served as partners in the cosmic struggle against chaos. The best human warriors earned places in Valhalla, not as servants or pets, but as valued allies in the final battle. This partnership extended to the establishment of moral and legal codes that governed human society. The gods didn't simply demand blind obedience. They provided frameworks for justice, honor, and social cooperation that allowed human civilization to flourish even in harsh northern climates where survival was never guaranteed. The concept of honor, so central to Norse culture, flowed directly from divine example. The gods themselves were bound by honor, unable to break oaths or abandon obligations without cosmic consequences. The seasonal festivals and sacrificial rituals weren't primitive superstitions designed to appease angry deities. They were sophisticated systems of social renewal that strengthened community bonds while acknowledging humanity's dependence on forces beyond their control. When communities gathered to sacrifice to the gods, they were participating in cosmic governance, contributing their voices and resources to the ongoing project of maintaining order against chaos. The role of the Norns, the three sisters who spun the threads of fate, presents one of the most philosophically sophisticated aspects of Norse cosmology. Even the gods were subject to fate, unable to change the fundamental trajectory of events that led inevitably to Ragnarok. Yet this didn't render them powerless or their efforts meaningless. Instead, it established a framework where free will operated within cosmic constraints, where choices mattered even when outcomes were predetermined. Odin's consultations with the Norns weren't attempts to change fate, but efforts to understand it fully so that his actions could align with cosmic reality rather than fight against it. This represents a form of wisdom that transcends simple human understanding of cause and effect. The gods learned to work with fate rather than against it, finding meaning and purpose in how they faced inevitable challenges rather than in preventing them entirely. The complexity of divine relationships extended beyond the Aesir to include their complicated alliances with the Vanir, the other major group of Norse gods. The war between these two divine tribes, followed by their eventual peace treaty and exchange of hostages, demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of conflict resolution that acknowledged both the costs of war and the benefits of cooperation. The integration of Vanir deities like Njörður, Freyr, and Freya into Asgard wasn't conquest or absorption. It was genuine fusion that strengthened both sides. This divine diplomacy established patterns that would influence human political development for centuries. The concept of hostage exchange as a guarantee of peace, the integration of former enemies into new power structures, and the recognition that different groups might have complementary strengths all flowed from divine example into human practice. The gods' approach to knowledge and wisdom reveals another crucial aspect of their governance philosophy. Odin's sacrifice of his eye for wisdom at Mimir's well wasn't just personal development. It was an acknowledgement that effective leadership requires sacrifice, that those who would guide others must be willing to pay prices that others cannot or will not pay. The knowledge Odin gained wasn't kept secret or hoarded for personal advantage. It was shared through poetry, prophecy, and direct intervention in human affairs. The ravens Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, represent the information gathering network that allowed Odin to govern effectively across the 9 realms. Their daily flights across all of existence weren't casual surveillance. They were systematic intelligence gathering that ensured divine decisions were based on comprehensive understanding rather than limited perspective. This established the principle that effective governance requires accurate information, even when that information is uncomfortable or challenging. The establishment of runic magic as both a communication system and a tool of power demonstrates the gods' understanding that knowledge itself is a form of governance. Sixtun, by giving humans access to written language and magical practices, the gods weren't just providing useful tools, they were creating the foundations for human civilization to develop independently while remaining connected to divine wisdom. The 8-legged horse Sleipnir, Odin's mount capable of traveling between all 9 realms, symbolizes the kind of mobility and accessibility that effective governance requires. A ruler who cannot reach all parts of their domain, who cannot move quickly between different spheres of influence, cannot govern effectively. Sleipnir's ability to travel not just across physical distances, but between different levels of reality represents the multidimensional thinking required for cosmic leadership. As we delve deeper into the intricate web of relationships, powers, and responsibilities that defined the Norse pantheon, it becomes clear that what emerged from the cosmic creation wasn't just a collection of powerful beings ruling through force. It was a sophisticated civilization that understood the delicate balance between order and chaos, the necessity of sacrifice for the greater good, and the tragic beauty of fighting for principles even when victory is impossible. The gods of Norse mythology established not just a world, but a way of understanding existence that acknowledged both its wonder and its inevitable ending. They created meaning not despite the certainty of Ragnarok, but because of it, showing that true heroism lies not in avoiding fate, but in facing it with wisdom, courage, and unwavering commitment to what matters most. This foundation of divine governance and cosmic order set the stage for the great stories, conflicts, and relationships that would define Norse mythology for millennia to come. The bonds between the Aesir gods were not merely political alliances or casual friendships. They represented something far more profound, a cosmic order built on mutual dependence, shared sacrifice, and the understanding that even gods must rely on one another to maintain the fragile balance between creation and destruction. At the heart of these divine relationships stood Odin, the Allfather, whose very nature embodied the complexities of divine kinship. He was not simply a ruler who commanded through force, but a patriarch who understood that true power came through connection, knowledge, and the willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. His relationships with his fellow gods were built on reciprocity and mutual respect, even when they involved difficult truths or painful decisions. The friendship between Odin and Loki exemplifies the sophisticated nature of divine relationships in Norse mythology. This was not a simple bond of loyalty, but a complex partnership that acknowledged both light and shadow, order and chaos. Loki served as Odin's blood brother, bound by oaths that transcended conventional morality. Their relationship was one of necessary tension, where Loki's chaotic nature provided the catalyst for growth and change that even the gods required. Odin understood that wisdom often comes through crisis, and Loki's provocations forced the Aesir to evolve, adapt, and strengthen their bonds with one another. The brotherhood between Odin and his brothers, Vili and Ve, represented another dimension of divine kinship. Together, they had shaped the world from Ymir's remains, each contributing their unique gifts to the act of creation. This founding partnership established a precedent for collaborative divine action, demonstrating that even the most fundamental acts of cosmic creation required cooperation and shared vision. Their bond was forged not just in blood, but in the shared responsibility of maintaining the universe they had brought into being. Thor's relationships within the divine family revealed yet another aspect of godly connection. As Odin's son, Thor embodied a different approach to divine responsibility. Where Odin sought wisdom through wandering and sacrifice, Thor protected through strength and direct action. Yet their relationship was built on mutual respect and complementary purposes. Odin's strategic wisdom guided Thor's protective instincts, while Thor's unwavering loyalty provided Odin with a champion who could defend what wisdom alone could not preserve. The bond between Thor and Loki added another layer of complexity to divine relationships. Despite their vastly different natures, they shared numerous adventures and challenges. Thor's straightforward heroism was often enhanced by Loki's cunning, while Loki's schemes frequently required Thor's strength to resolve the complications they created. Their friendship demonstrated that divine bonds could transcend personality differences when united by common purpose and mutual need. Baldur's position within the divine family highlighted the god's capacity for profound love and devastating loss. As the most beloved of the gods, Baldur represented the pinnacle of divine virtue and beauty. The other gods' desperate attempts to protect him, seeking oaths from every living thing to never harm him, revealed the depth of their emotional investment in one another. When Baldur's death came through Loki's manipulation and the blind god Hodor's unwitting participation, the entire divine order was shaken not just by the loss of one god, but by the shattering of trust and the revelation of their own vulnerability. The relationships among the goddesses added crucial dimensions to the divine social structure. Frigg's role as Odin's wife and queen positioned her as a figure of wisdom and foresight whose concerns for family and protection complemented Odin's broader cosmic responsibilities. Her grief over Baldur's fate and her attempts to prevent it showed how divine love could drive even the wisest to desperate measures. The goddess Freya brought her own sphere of influence, representing love, fertility, and the mysteries of cider magic, creating bonds with both Aesir and Vanir that helped bridge the two divine families. The integration of the Vanir gods into Aesir society through the exchange of hostages demonstrated the gods' ability to transform conflict into alliance. Njörður, Freyr, and Freya brought their own wisdom and powers, enriching the divine community while maintaining their distinct identities. This integration showed that divine society could evolve and expand, incorporating new perspectives and abilities while maintaining its essential character. The concept of divine hospitality played a crucial role in maintaining these relationships. The gods regularly gathered in great halls, sharing mead and stories, participating in contests of skill and wit. These gatherings were not mere social events, but sacred rituals that reinforced the bonds between the gods and reaffirmed their shared commitment to maintaining cosmic order. The tradition of gift-giving, oath-making, and the sharing of wisdom created a network of obligations and loyalties that strengthened the entire divine community. The gods' relationships with their children revealed another aspect of divine kinship. Odin's complex relationship with his many sons, including Thor, Baldur, Hodor, and Vidar, showed how divine parenthood involved not just love, but the burden of cosmic knowledge. Odin knew through his prophetic wisdom that some of his children would survive Ragnarok while others would perish, yet he continued to guide and protect them while preparing them for their destinies. The divine marriages within the pantheon created additional bonds that strengthened the community. These unions were not merely romantic partnerships, but alliances that combined different spheres of power and influence. Thor's marriage to Sif, with her golden hair representing the harvest, connected the god of storms to the fertility of the earth. Freyr's love for the giantess Gerdur demonstrated how divine love could bridge the gap between opposing forces, though it came at the cost of his magical sword. The gods' relationships were also tested and strengthened through shared ordeals. When Loki was finally bound as punishment for orchestrating Baldur's death, it was not just justice, but a painful severing of bonds that had held the divine community together. The choice to punish one of their own, despite their long history together, showed that divine relationships, however deep, were ultimately subordinate to cosmic justice and the maintenance of order. The concept of fate, as represented by the Norns, added another dimension to divine relationships. The gods understood that their bonds with one another existed within the framework of destiny, that their love, loyalty, and conflicts were all part of a larger pattern that would ultimately lead to Ragnarok and renewal. This knowledge gave their relationships a poignant intensity as they cherished their connections while knowing they were temporary. The divine feast halls, particularly Valhalla and Folkvanger, represented spaces where relationships could transcend even death. Warriors chosen by the gods would join the divine community, participating in eternal battles and feasts that prepared them for the final conflict. These halls showed how divine relationships could extend beyond the immediate family of gods to include worthy mortals, creating an expanded community united by shared values and purposes. The gods' practice of sharing knowledge and wisdom through their relationships created a network of divine learning. Odin's acquisition of the runes involved not just personal sacrifice, but the sharing of that knowledge with others. Mimir's Well of Wisdom became a resource that multiple gods could access, though always at a price. The tradition of asking for counsel and advice among the gods showed how their relationships served not just emotional needs, but practical ones, as they navigated the complexities of cosmic governance. The seasonal gatherings and the cyclical nature of divine activities reinforced the temporal aspects of their relationships. Like the natural world they governed, divine bonds had rhythms of closeness and distance, conflict and reconciliation, growth and rest. These cycles ensured that relationships remained dynamic and alive rather than becoming static or stagnant. The concept of divine honor and reputation played a crucial role in maintaining relationships among the gods. Actions that enhanced or diminished one god's standing affected the entire community, as their fates were interlinked. The careful attention to oaths, promises, and obligations showed how trust served as the foundation for all divine relationships, and how the breaking of that trust could have catastrophic consequences. The gods' ability to forgive and reconcile, despite serious conflicts, demonstrated the resilience of their bonds. Even after Loki's repeated betrayals and manipulations, the gods continued to include him in their community until his actions became truly unforgivable. This pattern of forgiveness and second chances showed that divine relationships were built to endure strain and conflict, recognizing that growth often comes through struggle and resolution. The shared creative projects of the gods, from the building of Asgard to the commissioning of magical artifacts from the dwarfs, provided opportunities for collaboration that strengthened their bonds. Working together toward common goals created shared experiences and mutual dependencies that went beyond mere friendship or family obligation. As Ragnarok approached, the relationships among the gods took on even greater significance. Knowing that their time was limited, they faced the choice of how to spend their remaining existence. Some bonds deepened through shared determination to face fate with courage, while others strained under the pressure of approaching doom. Yet even in the face of cosmic destruction, their relationships provided meaning, purpose, and the strength to continue fulfilling their responsibilities. The promise of renewal beyond Ragnarok included the possibility of restored relationships. Sons would remember fathers, friendships would be rekindled, and the divine community would be rebuilt on the foundation of what had come before. This vision of continuity showed that the gods understood their relationships as something that transcended even the end of the world, connecting past, present, and future in an eternal cycle of connection and renewal. In the end, the relationships among the Norse gods represented a sophisticated understanding of how individuals, even divine ones, create meaning through connection with others. Their bonds were not perfect or without conflict, but they were genuine, deep, and ultimately unbreakable by anything less than cosmic necessity. They showed that even gods need family, friends, and community to fulfill their purposes and find joy in existence, and that the strength to face even the end of the world comes not from solitary heroism, but from the courage we draw from those we love. The gods' last gamble. The great wheel of fate was beginning to crack. After countless eons of cosmic order, the threads holding the 9 realms together were unraveling faster than the Norns could weave them back. In the halls of Asgard, Odin sat upon his high throne, Lidskjalf, his one remaining eye scanning the vast expanse of creation with growing unease. The ravens Hugin and Munin perched restlessly on his shoulders, their dark wings rustling with nervous energy as they whispered disturbing reports from across the realms. The signs were everywhere for those wise enough to read them. In Midgard, the seasons had begun to blur into one endless winter. The sun grew dimmer each day, its light struggling to pierce through clouds that seemed to thicken with malevolent purpose. Crops withered in frozen fields, while livestock huddled together, their breath forming crystalline clouds in the unnaturally cold air. The humans, those precious children of Ask and Embla, gathered around their fires and spoke in hushed tones of dreams filled with wolves and serpents, of oceans rising to swallow the world. But it was not just Midgard that suffered under this cosmic malaise. In Alfheim, the light elves found their radiant halls dimming, as if some great shadow was slowly consuming their realm from within. The dark elves of Svartalfheim reported that their forges burned cold, despite the fury of their hammering, and even their master-crafted weapons seemed brittle and lifeless. From Jotunheim came word that the giants grew more restless with each passing day, their ancient hatred of the gods burning brighter than ever before. The dwarves in their mountain halls spoke of hearing strange sounds echoing through the deepest tunnels, sounds like chains breaking and ancient voices calling out in languages that predated the creation of the world. In Vanaheim, the Vanir gods who had once made peace with the Aesir now sent worried messages about disturbances in the natural order that even their deep connection to fertility and wisdom could not explain or heal. Most troubling of all were the reports from Helheim itself. The goddess Hel, daughter of Loki and ruler of the dishonored dead, had sent no word to Asgard for many seasons. The paths to her realm had grown treacherous and strange, with travelers reporting that the very landscape seemed to shift and change when they weren't looking directly at it. Some claimed to have seen figures walking those dark roads who should not have been able to leave their appointed places in the afterlife. Odin knew what these signs meant, though he was reluctant to speak the words aloud even to himself. The time of endings was approaching faster than any of the prophecies had suggested. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, was no longer a distant threat whispered about in the darkest corners of the future. It was here, pressing against the present moment, like a great beast testing the strength of its cage. The Allfather rose from his throne and walked to the great window that looked out over Asgard's golden halls. Below him, the other gods went about their daily business, but he could see the tension in their movements, the way they glanced nervously at the sky, the manner in which their hands never strayed far from their weapons. Even mighty Thor, ever confident in his strength, and his hammer Mjolnir, had taken to pacing the halls like a caged wolf, his red beard bristling with barely contained energy. Frigg, Odin's beloved wife and queen of the gods, approached him with careful steps. Her face, usually serene and wise, was marked with worry lines that seemed to have appeared overnight. She had been having the dreams again, visions of fire and flood, of a great serpent rising from the ocean to poison the sky with its venomous breath. In her dreams, she watched their son Balder die again and again, each death slightly different, but always ending in the same terrible darkness. "The Norns have stopped weaving," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I went to their well this morning and found them sitting in silence, their hands folded in their laps. When I asked them why, they simply looked at me with those ancient eyes and said that there were no more threads to weave. The pattern is complete." Odin nodded grimly. He had suspected as much. The three sisters who controlled fate itself, Urd who governed the past, Verdandi who ruled the present, and Skuld who shaped the future, had never ceased their eternal work since the beginning of time. If they had laid down their tools, it could only mean one thing. The story of the gods was reaching its final chapter. But even as this terrible knowledge settled over him like a burial shroud, Odin felt something else stirring in his chest. It was not despair, though that emotion certainly had its place in his heart. It was not fear, though he would have been a fool not to feel afraid. What burned within him was something more primal and defiant, the refusal to go gently into that final night. If the gods were to die, if the 9 realms were to be consumed by chaos and flame, then they would face that ending as they had lived, with courage, with honor, and with one last desperate throw of the dice. The Einherjar, those warriors who had died gloriously in battle and been brought to Valhalla to feast and fight until the end of days, had been training with renewed intensity. Their clashing swords and shields rang out across the golden halls from dawn until dusk, the sound like thunder rolling across a mountain peak. Odin had walked among them recently, watching as they practiced formations and tactics that had never been tested in actual combat. These were the gods' last hope, an army of the heroic dead who would stand with them when the final battle came. Yet even with 800 warriors emerging from each of Valhalla's 540 doors, Odin knew their forces would be outnumbered. The giants of Jotunheim had been multiplying and growing stronger for generations, and when the time came, they would be joined by all manner of monsters and creatures of chaos. Fenrir the Great Wolf would break free from his bonds, and his children Skull and Hati would finally catch and devour the sun and moon. Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent who encircled the world in the ocean's depths, would rise up and poison the very air with his venomous breath. Standing at his window, Odin made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days before. He would not wait for Ragnarok to come to them. Instead, he would take the fight to their enemies, striking first while they still had the advantage of preparation and position. It was a desperate gamble, one that went against every prophecy and prediction that had been made about the final battle. But perhaps that was exactly why it might work. The Allfather called for a gathering of all the gods in the great hall Gladsheim. They came quickly, sensing the urgency in his summons. Thor with his hammer crackling with barely contained lightning, Frigg with her spindle and her wisdom, Tyr the one-handed god of war with his battle-scarred face set in grim determination. Heimdall arrived from his post at the Rainbow Bridge, his golden eyes reflecting knowledge of distant realms and approaching threats. Even Vidar the Silent, Odin's son who rarely spoke, but was destined to survive Ragnarok, left his contemplations to answer his father's call. They gathered in a circle around the great fire that burned eternally in the center of the hall, its flames casting dancing shadows on the golden walls. The light flickered across their faces, revealing expressions of concern, curiosity, and growing resolve as they sensed that something momentous was about to be decided. Odin stood before them, his great spear Gungnir in his hand, his ravens perched on his shoulders, like omens of the storm to come. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority accumulated over countless ages, but also something new, the desperate hope of a leader who refuses to accept defeat even when all the odds are stacked against him. My kinsmen, he began, his single eye reflecting the firelight as it swept across their faces. The time we have long dreaded has come upon us sooner than we expected. The signs are clear to any who have the wisdom to read them. Ragnarok approaches, and with it the end of all things as we have known them. A murmur ran through the assembled gods, though none seemed truly surprised by this confirmation of what they had all been feeling in their bones. Thor's grip tightened on Mjolnir until his knuckles showed white, while Frigg's fingers worked nervously at her spindle. But I did not call you here to speak of endings, Odin continued, his voice growing stronger and more commanding. I called you here to speak of beginnings. The prophecies tell us that we are destined to fall, that chaos will consume order, that the great tree Yggdrasil itself will shake and tremble as the realms are torn apart. But prophecies, my friends, are not chains that bind us to an unchangeable fate. They are warnings, glimpses of what may come to pass if we do nothing to alter the course of events. Heimdall leaned forward slightly, his extraordinary senses already reaching out across the 9 realms to gauge the truth of what might be possible. What do you propose, Allfather? He asked, his voice carrying the musical quality that came from listening to the songs of creation itself. Odin's smile was sharp as a blade's edge. I propose we change the rules of the game. Every prophecy speaks of Ragnarok as a battle that comes to us, a final confrontation where we make our stand here in Asgard while our enemies gather their strength and choose the time and place of our destruction. But what if we were to strike first? What if we were to carry the battle to them while they still believe they have time to prepare? The suggestion sent a shock through the assembly, like lightning splitting the sky. It was audacious beyond measure, a complete reversal of everything they had been told, about how the end would come. Thor's eyes lit up with the prospect of taking the fight to their enemies rather than waiting to be attacked, while Tyr nodded slowly as he considered the tactical implications. The giants expect us to wait, Odin pressed on, seeing that his words were taking root in fertile ground. They expect us to gather our forces here in Asgard and prepare our defenses while they mass their armies and choose the moment of greatest advantage. But what if, instead of waiting for Fenrir to break his bonds, we were to face him while he is still chained? What if we could confront Jormungandr before he rises fully from the ocean depths? Frigg raised a concern that had been troubling her since her husband began speaking. But the prophecies speak of your death, my love, and of Thor's, and of so many others. How does striking first change those fundamental truths? The All-Father's expression grew thoughtful, and for a moment the firelight caught the silver threads in his beard, making him look ancient beyond measure. Perhaps it does not change them, he admitted with characteristic honesty. Perhaps we are still destined to fall in this final battle, but if we must die, then let us die on our own terms, in a manner of our choosing, and perhaps, just perhaps, by changing the when and where and how of this confrontation, we can alter enough of the pattern to save what matters most. He gestured toward the great doors of the hall, beyond which lay not just Asgard, but all the 9 realms connected by the world tree. The prophecies speak of total destruction, of fire and flood consuming everything, until only a few survivors remain to begin the world anew. But what if we could limit that destruction? What if our sacrifice could preserve more of what we hold dear? As the gods debated through the night, weighing the merits and dangers of Odin's radical proposal, none of them noticed the small figure that crept along the shadows at the edge of the great hall. Loki the trickster, the shape changer, the god who walked the line between friend and enemy, listened to every word with growing fascination and alarm. He had been expecting this moment for so long that it almost came as a relief to finally hear it spoken aloud. But Odin's plan to strike first changed everything, threw all of Loki's own carefully laid schemes into chaos. For while the other gods had been preparing for a defensive battle, Loki had been working toward a very different goal, ensuring that when Ragnarok came, it would burn away not just the gods, but the entire corrupt system they represented, clearing the ground for something new and better to grow. Now faced with the possibility that the gods might actually win their final gamble, Loki found himself confronting a choice he had hoped never to make. He could warn his giant allies and ensure that Odin's surprise attack would fail, guaranteeing the destruction he had long worked toward. Or he could remain silent and allow his adoptive family to attempt their desperate stratagem, knowing that success might mean his own plans would come to nothing. As dawn broke over Asgard's golden halls, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Loki slipped away from the great hall with his decision made. The final game was about to begin, and every player would soon discover that even the gods could not predict how the dice would fall when the stakes were nothing less than the fate of all existence. The last gamble of the gods was about to begin, and with it would come revelations that would shake the very foundations of the 9 realms. For in their desperate attempt to change their fate, the gods would discover truths about themselves, their enemies, and the nature of existence itself that would transform their understanding of what it truly meant to be divine. The age of prophecy was ending, and the age of choice was about to begin. The saga of Norse mythology reaches a critical turning point as we witness the transformation from cooperation to inevitable conflict. After establishing the cosmic framework and divine society, we now enter a phase where the very strengths that built this world begin to reveal their inherent contradictions and dangers. The Norse gods, having mastered the art of alliance and mutual dependence, now face the consequences of their own success. Their sophisticated network of relationships, which once provided stability and strength, becomes a web of competing loyalties and conflicting interests. The same wisdom that allowed them to harness chaotic forces now reveals uncomfortable truths about the future that awaits them. At the center of this transformation stands Loki, whose role evolves from helpful trickster to harbinger of doom. His shape-shifting nature, once an asset for solving divine problems, becomes a symbol of the fundamental instability that lurks beneath the surface of cosmic order. Loki embodies the principle that change is inevitable and that even the most carefully constructed systems contain the seeds of their own destruction. The gods' response to this growing instability reveals both their greatest strength and their fatal flaw, their unwavering commitment to facing destiny head-on. Rather than retreating or attempting to avoid their prophesied doom, they double down on their strategy of confrontation. They gather armies, forge weapons, and prepare for a final battle they know they cannot win. This paradoxical courage in the face of certain defeat becomes the defining characteristic of Norse heroism. Odin's quest for knowledge intensifies during this period, driven by his understanding that information is the only weapon that might alter fate. His sacrifices become more extreme, his methods more desperate, as he seeks any advantage in the coming conflict. The All-Father's transformation from wise ruler to obsessed seeker reflects the broader theme that wisdom and madness often walk hand in hand when confronting impossible odds. The concept of Ragnarok looms ever larger, not as a distant threat, but as an approaching reality that shapes every divine decision. The gods begin to see their world through the lens of its ending, making choices based not on immediate benefit, but on how they might influence the final outcome. This future-focused thinking creates a sense of urgency and purpose that drives the narrative toward its inevitable climax. The relationships between gods, giants, and humans become increasingly strained as the cosmic order begins to break down. Ancient alliances fracture, trusted allies become enemies, and the boundaries between friend and foe blur beyond recognition. The very network of connections that once provided strength now becomes a liability as betrayal and conflict spread like wildfire through the divine community. Yet even as the world moves inexorably toward destruction, the Norse gods maintain their commitment to their values and their people. They continue to protect Midgard, honor their oaths, and uphold the principles of courage and sacrifice that define their society. This steadfast dedication to duty in the face of overwhelming odds elevates their story from mere tragedy to epic heroism. The weapons and preparations for Ragnarok become symbols of defiance against fate itself. Every sword forged, every alliance made, every strategy devised represents an assertion that the gods will not go quietly into oblivion. They understand that victory may be impossible, but they refuse to surrender without giving their absolute best effort to protect what they hold dear. As tensions mount and the final conflict approaches, the Norse mythological world reveals its ultimate truth, that the greatest glory comes not from avoiding destruction, but from facing it with unwavering courage and determination. The gods choose to fight not because they believe they can win, but because fighting is who they are. Their willingness to sacrifice everything for their principles transforms their inevitable defeat into a moral victory that echoes through eternity. This transformation from cooperation to conflict, from building to battling, from hope to heroic despair, sets the stage for the climactic events that will reshape the cosmos entirely. The gods have learned that some challenges cannot be solved through cleverness or alliance, that some enemies cannot be reasoned with or defeated through conventional means. They face the ultimate test of their character as they prepare to confront forces that threaten not just their lives, but the very fabric of reality itself. Beyond the endless cycle of seasons, the Norse cosmos faced its ultimate test, the breaking of all bonds and the end of the world itself. Ragnarok wasn't merely a future event whispered about in prophecy. It was the inevitable conclusion toward which all of Norse mythology moved, as certain as winter following autumn. The signs of the coming end were already manifesting across the 9 realms. The moral fabric that held society together began to unravel as brother turned against brother, fathers slew their sons, and sacred oaths were broken without consequence. This wasn't merely political upheaval, it was cosmic decay, the gradual dissolution of the divine order that the gods had fought so hard to establish and maintain. The Fimbul winter would herald the final phase, a winter lasting 3 full years without reprieve, without the mercy of spring. Snow would fall from all directions, winds would cut like knives, and the sun would lose its power to warm the earth. During this endless winter, the bonds that held the most dangerous forces in check would finally snap. Fenrir the wolf, bound since his youth by the unbreakable chain Gleipnir, would at last break free from his restraints. His jaws would stretch so wide that his lower jaw would touch the earth, while his upper jaw scraped the sky, and he would devour everything in his path as he raced toward his final confrontation with Odin. The wolf's liberation was both literal and symbolic, the return of primal chaos that civilization had sought to contain. The Midgard serpent, Jormungandr, would thrash in the ocean surrounding the world, causing massive floods and poisoning the sky with his venomous breath. The serpent's movements would be so violent that the very foundations of Midgard would shake, and the seas would surge across the land, drowning entire kingdoms. From the realm of the dead, a ship would emerge, Naglfar, constructed entirely from the fingernails and toenails of the deceased. This vessel of horror would carry the dishonored dead, led by Loki himself, finally free from his torturous imprisonment. The trickster god, his face scarred by the venom that had dripped upon him for ages, would lead this army of the damned against his former companions. The fire giant Surtr would march from Muspelheim with his flaming sword, leading the forces of fire and destruction. His weapon would burn brighter than the sun itself, and wherever he walked, the earth would crack and blaze. Behind him would march the sons of Muspel, beings of pure flame, who would set the sky itself ablaze. On the field of Vigrid, a plain stretching 100 leagues in every direction, the final battle would commence. This would be no ordinary conflict, but a cosmic war where gods, giants, monsters, and the spirits of the heroic dead would clash in the ultimate confrontation between order and chaos. Odin, bearing his spear Gungnir and mounted on eight-legged Sleipnir, would face Fenrir in single combat. The Allfather, who had sacrificed his eye for wisdom and hung himself from Yggdrasil to gain knowledge of the runes, would meet his doom in the jaws of the wolf he had once tried to befriend. Thor would battle Jormungandr, and though the thunder god would succeed in slaying the world serpent, he would take only 9 steps before falling dead from its poison. Tyr, the one-handed god of war and justice, would face Garm, the hound of hell, and both would perish in their struggle. Freyr, having long ago traded away his magical sword for love, would fall to Surtur's flaming blade. Loki and Heimdall, eternal enemies, would slay each other in their final confrontation, settling at last their ancient enmity. As the battle raged, Surtur would fulfill his ultimate purpose. He would raise his burning sword and set fire to the world tree itself. Yggdrasil, which had connected all the 9 realms and served as the axis of existence, would burn. The flames would consume everything: the gods, the giants, the 9 worlds, and all life within them. The stars would fall from the sky, the earth would sink into the sea, and even the sea itself would burn. Yet Norse mythology did not end in absolute destruction. From the ashes of the old world, a new earth would emerge, green and fertile, rising from the waters. Some gods would survive: Odin's sons Vidar and Vali, Thor's sons Modi and Magni, who would inherit their father's hammer, and Balder and Hodur would return from the realm of the dead. These surviving deities would gather in Idavol, where Asgard once stood, and find among the ruins the golden chess pieces with which the gods had once played, symbols of a new beginning. 2 humans, Lif and Lifthrasir, would survive the conflagration by hiding in the branches of Yggdrasil itself. They would emerge to repopulate the new world, and their descendants would spread across the green earth. A new sun, daughter of the old, would rise to light the sky, and the cycle of existence would begin anew. This vision of Ragnarok reveals the profound Norse understanding of time as cyclical rather than linear. Destruction was not an end but a transformation, a necessary burning away of the old to make space for the new. The gods themselves were not eternal. They too were subject to fate, to the laws that governed all existence. Their heroism lay not in achieving immortality, but in facing their doom with courage and dignity. The concept of Ragnarok also reflected the harsh realities of Norse life, where communities lived under constant threat of destruction from natural disasters, warfare, and the unforgiving climate. The myth acknowledged that all things, no matter how mighty or well established, must eventually come to an end. Yet it also promised renewal, the eternal hope that from destruction would come new life, new possibilities, new worlds to explore and inhabit. In this way, Ragnarok was both the ultimate expression of Norse fatalism and their deepest source of hope. The gods would die, but their legacy would continue. The world would burn, but a new earth would rise. Civilization would fall, but from its ashes new societies would grow. This was the final wisdom of Norse mythology, that endings are also beginnings, that death makes way for life, and that even the twilight of the gods cannot extinguish the eternal human capacity for renewal and hope. The gods who walked the earth and shaped the cosmos were not merely content to create and rule. They understood that even divine order required vigilance, for beyond the borders of their carefully crafted realms lurked forces of primordial chaos, ancient entities that predated creation itself and hungered to return the universe to the void from which it emerged. Chief among these chaotic forces were the Jotnar, the giants. These were not simply large beings, but embodiments of the untamed forces of nature. Winter storms that could freeze entire kingdoms, earthquakes that split mountains, floods that drowned worlds. They represented everything wild and uncontrollable that the gods sought to bind within the laws of cosmic order. Yet the relationship between gods and giants was complex, woven with threads of kinship, rivalry, and grudging respect. The most dangerous of these primordial threats was Jormungandr, the world serpent. Cast into the ocean that encircled Midgard by Odin himself, this monstrous offspring of Loki grew so vast that it could wrap itself around the entire world and grasp its own tail. Its very existence was a reminder that chaos slumbered just beneath the surface of order, waiting for the right moment to emerge and reclaim dominion over all creation. But perhaps the most complex threat came from within the gods' own ranks. Loki, the trickster, walked the razor's edge between order and chaos. Neither fully god nor giant, but something in between, he served as both catalyst and conscience for the Aesir. His cunning had saved the gods countless times, yet his nature also drove him toward increasingly destructive acts. The other gods tolerated his provocations because they needed his wit and resourcefulness, but each transgression pushed them closer to an inevitable reckoning. The gods' response to these threats was not passive. They understood that eternal vigilance was the price of cosmic stability. Thor, the thunder god, made it his sacred duty to battle the giants, wielding his hammer Mjolnir in an endless war against the forces of chaos. His journeys to Jotunheim were not mere adventures, but essential missions to maintain the balance between order and destruction. Meanwhile, Odin pursued knowledge with desperate intensity, seeking every scrap of wisdom that might help the gods prepare for the trials ahead. He sacrificed his eye for a drink from Mimir's well of wisdom, hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights to discover the secrets of the runes, and constantly sent his ravens across all 9 realms to gather intelligence. This was not mere curiosity, but strategic necessity. Odin had glimpsed the future and knew that even the gods were not immortal. The Volva, the Cyrus, had spoken of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. This was not simply an ending, but a cosmic necessity, a time when the accumulated tensions between order and chaos would finally explode into universal conflict. The gods would face their greatest enemies. Thor would battle Jormungandr, Odin would confront the great wolf Fenrir, and Freyr would fall to the fire giant Surtur. The very foundations of the cosmos would shake, the world tree would tremble, and the carefully maintained barriers between the realms would collapse. Yet even in the face of this inevitable doom, the gods did not despair. Norse mythology was built on the understanding that struggle itself gave life meaning. The gods fought not because they believed they could win forever, but because the fight itself was noble. They defended order not out of certainty, but out of duty. They faced their fate with courage, because courage in the face of overwhelming odds was the highest virtue their culture could imagine. This cosmic drama played out on every level of Norse society. Kings and warriors understood that they too walked the line between order and chaos, that their role was to defend civilization against the forces that would tear it down. The hall rulers who protected their people from raiders, the farmers who wrested crops from harsh soil, the craftsmen who shaped raw materials into useful tools, all participated in the same eternal struggle that occupied the gods themselves. The concept of weird, often translated as fate, bound all these struggles together. This was not a passive acceptance of predetermined outcomes, but an understanding that past actions created present circumstances, which in turn shaped future possibilities. The gods were bound by word just as mortals were, but this binding was not slavery. It was the very structure that made heroic action possible. One could choose how to meet one's fate, and that choice echoed through the cosmic order. The wisdom of Norse mythology lay in its refusal to promise easy victories or eternal happiness. Instead, it offered something more valuable, the knowledge that struggle itself was sacred, that defending what mattered was worth any cost, and that even in defeat one could achieve a kind of immortal glory. The gods would fall at Ragnarok, but their courage in facing that doom would inspire new generations to take up the same noble fight. This understanding permeated every aspect of Norse culture, from the warrior's code that demanded bravery in battle to the farmer's patient endurance of harsh winters. It taught that the universe was not a comfortable place designed for human happiness, but a testing ground where character was forged through adversity. The gods themselves were not perfect beings ruling from remote heights, but flawed individuals doing their best to maintain order in a chaotic cosmos. And perhaps that was the most profound teaching of all, that even the divine struggled with doubt, made mistakes, and faced consequences they could not escape. The gods were not distant idols to be worshipped, but examples to be followed, beings who chose to stand against the darkness, not because victory was certain, but because standing itself was what mattered. In this way, Norse mythology offered not comfort, but inspiration, not easy answers, but the courage to keep asking difficult questions, and not the promise of paradise, but the nobility of the fight itself. When the gods gazed across the 9 realms from their high halls in Asgard, they saw a cosmos balanced on the edge of a blade. On one side stood order, wisdom, and the bonds that held all things together. On the other lurked chaos, ancient grudges, and forces that would not rest until everything burned. This was not a battle that could be won with swords or spears. This was a war for the very soul of existence itself. The prophecies had been whispered since the dawn of time. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. Not merely an ending, but a cosmic unraveling that would consume gods and mortals alike. Yet even as this doom approached, the gods did not cower. They prepared, they schemed, and they made choices that would echo through the final battle and beyond. In the halls of Asgard, Odin the All-Father walked with the weight of terrible knowledge. His ravens, Hugin and Munin, brought him word from every corner of the 9 realms. His 8-legged steed, Sleipnir, had carried him to the darkest depths of knowledge, and what he had learned filled even the wisest of gods with dread. The end was not merely coming, it had already begun. The signs were everywhere for those who knew how to read them. Loki, once the gods' cunning ally, had become their greatest enemy. Bound beneath the earth, with poison dripping onto his face, his writhing in agony shook the very foundations of the world. His monstrous children grew stronger with each passing day. Jormungandr, the world serpent, stirred in the depths of the ocean, his massive coils encircling Midgard. Fenrir the wolf, bound by the god's own trickery, strained against chains forged from impossible things. And Hel, half living and half dead, ruled over the dishonored dead in her grim realm. But it was not only Loki's offspring that threatened the cosmic order. The giants, ancient enemies of the gods, gathered their strength in Jotunheim. Led by Surtur the fire giant, whose flaming sword would one day consume the world tree itself, they prepared for the final assault on Asgard. The frost giants, children of the primordial void, sharpened their weapons of ice and hatred. Even the elements themselves seemed to rebel as winters grew longer and summers failed to come. The gods, however, were not idle. They had spent centuries preparing for this moment, knowing that their fate was sealed, but refusing to meet it unprepared. Odin had sacrificed his eye for wisdom and hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights to learn the runes. Thor strengthened his arm and tested his hammer Mjolnir against every giant he could find. Freya trained the Einherjar, the chosen slain, in her hall Folkvanger, and Frigg, Odin's wife, traveled to every being in the 9 realms to extract oaths that they would not harm her beloved son Balder. Yet for all their preparation, the gods could not escape the fundamental truth of Norse cosmology. Even they were subject to fate. The Norns, those ancient sisters who wove the threads of destiny at the base of Yggdrasil, had already determined how the story would end. The gods could face their doom with courage and cunning, but they could not avoid it. This acceptance of fate, this willingness to fight even knowing the outcome, became the defining characteristic of the Norse divine. The first true sign that Ragnarok had begun came with the death of Balder the Beautiful. The most beloved of all the gods, Balder was everything that was good and pure in the world. His death, brought about by Loki's treachery and the only thing in creation that could harm him, a simple sprig of mistletoe, sent shockwaves through all the realms. When the gods discovered Loki's role in the murder, their patience finally broke. They bound him in a cave with the entrails of his own son, where a serpent would drip poison onto his face until the end of days. But binding Loki came at a terrible cost. His wife Sigyn remained by his side, catching the poison in a bowl to spare him pain. But when the bowl filled and she had to empty it, the poison would fall on Loki's face, and his agonized writhing would shake the earth. These earthquakes were not merely geological events. They were the labor pains of a dying world. As Loki's suffering continued, the barriers between the realms began to weaken. The careful order that the gods had maintained for so long started to crumble. Wolves began to chase the sun and moon across the sky, growing closer with each passing day. Brothers fought brothers without cause. Sacred oaths were broken. The bonds of kinship and honor that held society together dissolved. This was the Fimbulwinter, 3 years of moral darkness that would precede the final battle. In this time of chaos, unexpected alliances formed. Some humans, seeing the weakness of the gods, turned to the giants for protection. Others, recognizing that their fate was tied to Asgard's, prepared to fight alongside their divine protectors. The dead stirred in their graves, and Hel's forces grew stronger. Even the world tree itself began to show signs of distress, its leaves yellowing and its mighty trunk groaning under the weight of cosmic discord. The gods knew that when the final battle came, It would not be fought in the halls of Asgard or on the battlefields of Midgard. It would take place on Vigrid, a vast plain that stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction. Here, all the forces of order and chaos would meet for the last time. Here, the fate of everything would be decided not by wisdom or trickery, but by strength, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for what one believed in. As the Fimbul winter reached its climax, Heimdall the watchman prepared to sound the Gjallarhorn one final time. His keen eyes, which could see across all the 9 realms, watched for the signs that would herald the beginning of the end. When Loki finally broke free from his bonds, when his children stirred from their prisons, when Surtur led the fire giants from Muspelheim, then the horn would sound and the final battle would begin. As the sun set over the battlefield of Vigrid, blood staining the earth where gods and giants had fallen, silence claimed the Norse cosmos. The age of the Aesir was ending, but their story was far from over. For in the mythology of the North, destruction and creation were bound together like threads in the tapestry of fate. Ragnarok was not merely an ending, it was a transformation. From the ashes of the old world, new life stirred. The earth, cleansed by fire and flood, began to heal. Green shoots pushed through blackened soil. Rivers ran clear once more. The sun's daughter, Suna, took her mother's place in the sky, casting light over us a world reborn. And from Yggdrasil's mighty trunk, where they had hidden during the final conflagration, 2 humans emerged, Lif and Lefthrasir, whose names meant life and striving for life. Those sole survivors of humanity carried within them the memory of the old world and the promise of the new. They would repopulate the earth, but they would not repeat the mistakes of their ancestors. The cycles of violence and vengeance that had consumed gods and mortals alike would give way to wisdom earned through suffering. Some of the gods, too, survived the twilight. Vidar, the silent god who had avenged his father Odin by slaying Fenrir, emerged from the ruins. Vali, born for vengeance but now freed from that burden, stood beside him. Thor's sons, Modi and Magni, inherited their father's strength but not his quick temper. They carried Mjolnir between them, the great hammer now a symbol of protection rather than destruction. Most remarkably, Balder the Beautiful returned from the realm of the dead, his death finally undone, his light restored to the world. These new gods looked upon the fresh earth with different eyes. Where their predecessors had ruled through might and cunning, they would govern through justice and compassion. The harsh wisdom of the old ways, that all things must end, that even gods could fall, had been learned at terrible cost. Now that knowledge would serve not to breed despair, but to inspire gratitude for each moment of peace, each act of kindness, each day free from the shadow of doom. The halls of the gods were rebuilt, but they were different now. No longer were they places of constant feasting and boasting of battles to come. Instead, they became centers of learning and healing. The new gods remembered the price of pride and the value of humility. They had seen what happened when divine beings forgot their responsibility to the worlds below. In Midgard, the descendants of Lif and Lefthrasir built new settlements. They honored the gods, but they did not fear them as their ancestors had. The relationship between divine and mortal had been reforged in the fires of Ragnarok. Gods walked among humans not as distant rulers, but as guides and protectors. The barriers between the 9 worlds became more permeable, allowing for greater understanding and cooperation between all beings. The stories of the old gods were not forgotten. Bards sang of Odin's sacrifice on the world tree, of Thor's mighty deeds, of Loki's complex legacy of creation and destruction. These tales served as both entertainment and instruction, reminding each new generation of the consequences of unchecked ambition and the importance of wisdom over raw power. The mythology lived on, but its meaning had evolved. Even Loki, whose actions had precipitated the final battle, was not entirely cast into darkness. Some whispered that he too would return, but changed by his suffering. The trickster who had once sowed chaos might become a force for necessary change. His cunning turned toward solving problems rather than creating them. For the Norse understood that even the most fallen could find redemption, that transformation was always possible for those willing to face the truth of their actions. The world tree, Yggdrasil, stood renewed and strengthened. Its roots reached deeper into the wells of wisdom. Its branches stretched higher into the heavens. The scars left by the final battle had healed, and new growth covered old wounds. The great ash had endured as it always had, as it always would. It remained the axis around which all existence turned, the constant in a cosmos of change. As the new age dawned, the cosmic order was not simply restored, it was reimagined. The rigid hierarchies of the past gave way to a more flexible understanding of divine and mortal roles. Heroes were still celebrated, but so were healers, teachers, and peacekeepers. Strength was valued, but so were compassion, wisdom, and the courage to admit when one was wrong. The 9 worlds thrived under this new dispensation. Alfheim's light elves shared their knowledge more freely. The dwarves of Svartalfheim emerged from their underground forges to trade not just in weapons and tools, but in art and beauty. Even the giants, those ancient enemies of the gods, found their place in the new order. Many had fought alongside the gods at Ragnarok, and their sacrifice was remembered with honor. In this way, Norse mythology revealed its deepest truth, that endings are also beginnings, that destruction can clear the way for something better, and that even the mightiest must eventually yield to change. The stories that began with the primordial clash of fire and ice, that chronicled the rise and fall of gods and heroes, that witnessed that ultimate battle between order and chaos, concluded not with despair, but with hope. The Norse cosmos turned full circle, from the void of Ginnungagap to the fertile earth of the New World. It was a mythology that refused easy answers, that embraced complexity and contradiction, that found meaning in struggle rather than in simple victory. The gods who survived Ragnarok were wiser for their losses. The humans who inherited the earth were stronger for their trials, and the cosmos itself was more beautiful for having been broken and remade. In the end, the story of Norse mythology was the story of growth through adversity, of wisdom earned through pain, of hope kindled in the darkest hour. It spoke to something eternal in the human spirit, the belief that no matter how dark the present might seem, the future held the possibility of renewal. The old gods had passed away, but their legacy lived on in the new world they had died to create. And in that continuation, in that endless cycle of death and rebirth, lay the true immortality of the Norse mythological tradition. The fire that consumed the old world had not destroyed everything. It had purified it, leaving behind only what was truly valuable: love, wisdom, courage, and the unquenchable hope for a better tomorrow. This was the gift of Ragnarok, the promise hidden within the prophecy of doom. The gods could die, the world could end, but the story would always continue. The golden age of Asgard was ending, and everyone could feel it. The gods, who had once ruled with confidence and purpose, now moved through their halls with the weight of inevitability pressing down upon them. Baldur's death had shattered something fundamental in the cosmic order. The light of the world had dimmed, and in that growing darkness, whispers of Ragnarok grew louder. But this wasn't a sudden collapse. This was a slow, grinding descent into chaos, like watching a great tree die from the roots up. The signs were everywhere, written in blood and shadow across the 9 realms. The Fimbulwinter had begun, 3 years of endless cold, with no summer to break the ice. Brothers turned against brothers. The bonds of kinship and honor that had once held society together began to fray and snap. Wolves devoured the sun and moon, plunging the world into perpetual twilight. Yet even as the end approached, the gods refused to surrender. This was their defining moment, the test that would reveal who they truly were when everything they had built was crumbling around them. Some, like Odin, threw themselves into desperate preparations, seeking any knowledge, any weapon, any alliance that might tip the scales in the final battle. Others, like Thor, simply gripped their weapons tighter and prepared to meet doom with defiance blazing in their hearts. The irony was not lost on them. They had always known this day would come. The Norns had woven Ragnarok into the very fabric of fate from the beginning. Every choice, every victory, every moment of joy had been leading inexorably to this twilight of the gods. And yet, knowing their doom didn't make them passive. If anything, it made them burn brighter, fight harder, love more fiercely in the time they had left. Loki, bound beneath the earth with poison dripping onto his face, had become the dark heart around which the coming destruction would revolve. His wife Sigyn caught what drops she could in her bowl, but when she turned to empty it, the venom fell upon Loki's face, and his agonized writhing shook the very foundations of the world. Each tremor was a reminder that the bonds holding back chaos were weakening. Each earthquake whispered that the day of reckoning was drawing near. The monsters that the gods had long ago banished or bound were stirring. Fenrir the wolf, chained on the island of Lyngvi, felt his bonds growing loose as the cosmic order weakened. Jormungandr, the world serpent, thrashed in the ocean depths, poisoning the seas and sending great waves crashing against the shores of Midgard. The ship Naglfar, built from the fingernails of the dead, was nearly complete, ready to carry an army of corpses to the final battlefield. But perhaps the most telling sign of the approaching end was what happened to the bonds between the gods themselves. The easy camaraderie that had once defined life in Asgard was strained to the breaking point. Old grievances resurfaced, ancient jealousies festered. The unity that had made them strong was fragmenting just when they needed it most. Frigg had never forgiven herself for Baldur's death, though she had secured oaths from everything in creation except the mistletoe. She wandered Asgard's halls like a ghost, her grief a constant reminder of what had been lost. Odin grew ever more distant and obsessive, disappearing for days at a time in pursuit of knowledge that might save them all, or at least help them die with purpose. Thor remained steadfast, but even his strength seemed insufficient against the magnitude of what was coming. The gods had always been flawed, driven by the same passions and weaknesses as mortals, but magnified by their divine nature. Now, as the end approached, those flaws were becoming cracks that threatened to split them apart entirely. Pride, anger, desperation, fear, all the emotions they had tried to master were consuming them from within. Yet there was something beautiful in their refusal to simply accept defeat. They could have retreated to some distant corner of creation, could have tried to hide from their fate. Instead, they chose to meet it head on, to make their final stand not in despair, but in defiance. This was the Norse way, to face the darkness with weapons drawn and songs on their lips, to transform inevitable defeat into something approaching victory through the sheer force of will and courage. The Einherjar, the chosen slain who feasted in Valhalla, sensed the change as well. Their eternal revelry took on a different tone, less celebration and more preparation. They had been gathered for this moment, to stand beside the gods when the final battle came. Every day they fought and died and were reborn, honing their skills for the war that would end all wars. They were ready. In Midgard, the mortal world, humanity struggled to survive the endless winter and the breakdown of social order. But even there, in the darkest hours, heroes arose, men and women who chose to protect the innocent, to uphold justice, to kindle light in the growing darkness. They might not have the power of gods, but they had something equally valuable: the knowledge that how you face the end matters as much as the end itself. The cosmic tree Yggdrasil, which had stood strong through countless ages, began to show signs of strain. Its leaves yellowed and fell. Its roots, which had once drawn nourishment from the wells of wisdom and fate, found the waters growing bitter and dark. Even the great ash tree that connected all the realms was not immune to the spreading corruption. But still it stood. Still it held the 9 worlds together through sheer stubborn endurance. Like the gods themselves, Yggdrasil refused to fall before its time. It would weather this storm as it had weathered so many others, or it would die magnificently in the attempt. The dwarves in their mountain halls worked with frantic energy, forging weapons for the final battle. They had always been master craftsmen, but now they poured all their skill and knowledge into creating tools of war. Swords that would never dull, shields that could turn aside any blow, armor that might protect a hero for just a few moments longer. They knew their work might be futile, but they also knew that futility was no excuse for not trying. The light elves of Alfheim and the dark elves of Svartalfheim chose their sides as the battle lines were drawn. Some would stand with the gods, others with the forces of chaos. The neat divisions that had once defined the cosmos were breaking down, replaced by a more fundamental choice between order and destruction, hope and despair, light and darkness. Even the giants, those ancient enemies of the gods, were not united in their approach to Ragnarok. Some rejoiced at the coming destruction, seeing it as their chance for revenge against those who had driven them to the edges of creation. Others, wiser or perhaps more weary, understood that the end of the gods meant the end of everything, including themselves. Destruction, once unleashed, does not discriminate between friend and foe. As the signs multiplied and the darkness deepened, one truth became clear to all who witnessed these terrible times. This was not just the end of an age or the fall of a dynasty. This was the conclusion of the entire cosmic order that had governed existence since the beginning of time. Everything that had been would pass away. Everything that was would be consumed. Only from that complete destruction could something new emerge. The gods understood this, perhaps better than anyone. They had always known that their reign was temporary, that they were shepherds of creation rather than its eternal masters. But understanding and accepting are different things entirely. They would not go gently into that good night. They would rage against the dying of the light with every weapon at their disposal, every breath in their bodies, every spark of divinity that still burned within them. And in that rage, in that magnificent refusal to surrender without a fight, they revealed something profound about the nature of heroism itself. True courage is not the absence of fear or the certainty of victory. It is the choice to stand and fight when defeat is certain, to protect what matters, even when protection seems impossible, to kindle hope in the hearts of others, even when your own hope has died. The gods of Asgard, for all their flaws and failures, embodied that kind of courage. They had created a world of beauty and meaning, had fostered love and loyalty and honor among mortals and immortals alike. Now, as that world faced its final hour, they prepared to defend it not because they could win, but because it was worth defending. The twilight was deepening. The final battle was approaching. Soon the horns would sound, calling all who served the light to make their last stand. But until that moment came, the gods would continue to be what they had always been, flawed, passionate, magnificent beings who chose hope over despair, courage over comfort, defiance over surrender. The end was coming, but it had not come yet, and while they still drew breath, while the sun still shone however dimly in the sky, while love and loyalty still existed in the hearts of gods and mortals alike, there was still reason to fight. There was still reason to hope. There was still reason to believe that even in defeat, something beautiful and eternal might be preserved. The twilight of the gods has arrived. The skies burn crimson above the 9 realms as ancient prophecies reach their terrifying fulfillment. For eons, the cosmic tree Yggdrasil has held all existence together, its mighty branches supporting worlds of gods and mortals alike. But now those branches tremble. The end of all things approaches, and its name is Ragnarok. The signs are unmistakable, carved into the very fabric of reality, like scars across the face of creation. The Fimbul winter has begun, a winter so severe it will last 3 full years without reprieve. Snow falls in torrents across Midgard, burying homes and hope alike. The sun grows dim and distant, offering no warmth to the frozen earth below. Brothers turn against brothers in desperate struggles for survival, while children forget the faces of their parents in the endless howling darkness. But the cosmic winter is merely the overture to a symphony of destruction that will reshape existence itself. Deep beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, ancient bonds weaken and snap like overstretched rope. The great wolf Fenrir, bound since his youth by the god's own trickery, feels his mystical chains growing thin. Each howl that echoes from his prison sends tremors through the 9 realms, a countdown to freedom and vengeance. In the depths of the ocean that encircles Midgard, Jormungandr the world serpent stirs in his slumber. The massive coils of his body, which have rested on the sea floor for countless ages, begin to shift and writhe when he finally rises from the depths, His movement will poison the very air and cause the seas to surge over the highest mountains. The serpent's awakening is not a matter of if, but when. Meanwhile, in the realm of the dishonored dead, Hell marshals her forces. From her kingdom of shadows and sorrow, she commands legions of those who died in glorious deaths, not in battle, but from disease, old age, and misfortune. These pale warriors hunger for their chance at glory, even if it means the destruction of everything they once knew. Beside them march the Draugr, the walking dead whose eyes burn with cold fire, and whose touch brings the chill of the grave. The gods themselves feel the weight of approaching doom pressing down upon them like a mountain of inevitability. In Gladsheim, the golden hall of the gods, Odin sits upon his high throne, Hlidskjalf with his ravens, Hugin and Munin perched beside him. These birds, whose names mean thought and memory, bring him news from across all the realms, and every report confirms what the Allfather already knows in his heart. The end approaches, and even his vast wisdom cannot prevent it. Odin's single eye, the others sacrificed long ago for wisdom, gazes into the swirling mists of fate. He sees the threads of destiny converging on a single point, the battlefield of Vigrid, where the final battle will unfold. There he will face the wolf that was once bound by oath and trickery. There his son Thor will meet the serpent in a battle that will shake the very foundations of the world. There the gods will make their last stand against the forces of chaos and destruction. Yet even knowing the outcome, even seeing his own death reflected in the wells of prophecy, Odin does not despair. Instead, he acts. For years uncounted, he has wandered the 9 realms in disguise, gathering the greatest warriors who have ever lived. These Einherjar, the glorious dead, feast and fight in Valhalla, preparing for the final battle. Each day they practice combat until their skills reach perfection. Each evening they feast on mead and the meat of the boar Sehrimnir, which is slaughtered daily only to be reborn whole for the next feast. The gods know they cannot win this war in any conventional sense. The prophecies are clear. Ragnarok will consume gods and giants alike, leaving only ash and ruin in its wake. But victory, they understand, is not always about survival. Sometimes victory lies in how one chooses to face inevitable defeat. The gods choose to meet their doom with weapons drawn and battle cries on their lips. As the signs multiply and the very air grows thick with approaching catastrophe, even the cosmic tree itself begins to show strain. Yggdrasil's leaves, once eternally green and vibrant, start to yellow and fall like tears shed by the universe itself. The 3 wells at its roots, Urd's well of fate, Mimir's well of wisdom, and Hvergelmir's spring of all rivers, begin to bubble and churn as if reflecting the turmoil that grips all creation. The Norns, those 3 ancient sisters who weave the fates of gods and men, work frantically at their loom, but now their threads tangle and break, creating patterns of destruction rather than destiny. Urd, who governs the past, sees all the choices that led to this moment. Verdandi, who rules the present, feels the weight of each passing second, bringing doom closer. And Skuld, who commands the future, weaves endings rather than beginnings. In Asgard, the gods hold council after council, but no solution presents itself. They are bound by the very laws they helped create, the concept of weird, of fate, that gives structure and meaning to existence. To fight against fate is to fight against the fundamental order of reality itself. Yet they cannot simply surrender. Their nature as gods, as protectors of order and civilization, compels them to stand and fight, even when hope has died. Thor, the thunder god, grips his hammer Mjolnir with knuckles white as bone. He has faced giants and monsters throughout his long existence, protecting both gods and mortals from the forces of chaos. Now he faces his greatest challenge, not just another battle, but the last battle. The serpent Jormungandr awaits him on the field of Vigrid, and their confrontation will determine not just their individual fates, but the fate of all existence. Freyr, the god of fertility and prosperity, has already made his sacrifice. Long ago, he traded away his magical sword for love, giving it to win the hand of the giantess Gerdur. Now facing the final battle without his greatest weapon, he knows he will fall to Surtur's flaming blade. Yet he feels no regret, for love was worth the price, even if that price is paid in blood on the field of doom. Tyr, the one-handed god of war and justice, feels a grim satisfaction as he contemplates the approaching battle. He lost his hand to Fenrir's jaws when the gods bound the wolf with trickery and lies. Now he will face that same wolf again, and though he knows he will not survive the encounter, he also knows that justice will finally be served. The gods will pay for their deceptions, just as the forces of chaos will pay for their destructive hunger. The approach of Ragnarok affects not just gods and giants, but every living thing throughout the 9 realms. In Midgard, mortal humans huddle around their fires and tell stories of better times when the sun shone bright and the harvest was plentiful. They offer prayers to gods who may not survive to answer them, and they prepare for an end they cannot comprehend but feel approaching in their very bones. Even the dwarves in their mountain halls and the light elves in Alfheim sense the cosmic disturbance. The dwarves work frantically at their forges, creating weapons and artifacts of incredible power, though they know not who will wield them or against what enemies. The light elves sing laments that drift like ethereal music through their realm, beautiful and heartbreaking melodies that speak of loss and transformation. The very fabric of reality begins to fray as the moment of ultimate confrontation approaches. Time itself seems to slow and quicken unpredictably. The barriers between the realms grow thin, allowing creatures and energies to slip from one world to another. Portents appear in the skies, auroras that burn like fire, stars that fall like tears, and the moon that shows faces of blood and shadow. In the depths of Muspelheim, Surtur the fire giant prepares for his role in the cosmic drama. His flaming sword, which burns brighter than the sun itself, thirsts for the destruction it was forged to bring. Surtur does not act from malice or hatred, but from cosmic necessity. He is the agent of renewal through destruction, the force that will clear away the old to make room for the new. When he finally strides forth from his realm of fire, his footsteps will leave molten glass in their wake, and his breath will turn the very air to flame. The bound wolf Fenrir feels his chains weakening with each passing moment. Born as a pup among the gods, he was raised in Asgard until his size and growing power made the gods fearful. They claimed they wanted to test his strength, but their true intention was to bind him permanently with chains forged from impossible things. The sound of a cat's footfall, the breath of a fish, the roots of a mountain. The wolf's fury at this betrayal has only grown stronger during his long imprisonment, and when he finally breaks free, that rage will shake the very pillars of heaven. The world serpent Jormungandr, offspring of Loki and the giantess Angrboda, has grown so large that he encircles all of Midgard with his body, grasping his own tail in his mouth. His venom is so potent that when he finally releases his tail and rises from the ocean, the sky itself will turn green with poison. The serpent and Thor are destined to be each other's doom. The thunder god will slay the great worm, but will die from its venom before he can take 9 steps from their battlefield. As these cosmic forces gather and the threads of fate pull taut, even Loki, the trickster god bound in torment for his role in Baldur's death, feels the approaching culmination. The fire giant's daughter Hel, who rules the realm of the dishonored dead, is his offspring. The wolf Fenrir is his son. The world serpent is his child. In a very real sense, Loki has given birth to the agents of Ragnarok itself, and when the final battle comes, he will march alongside the forces of destruction against his former companions among the gods. The cosmic irony is not lost on any of the participants in this ultimate drama. The gods, in their attempts to prevent the very destruction they feared, have through their actions ensured that it will come to pass. By binding Fenrir, they created an enemy who will devour Odin himself. By casting out Jormungandr, they allowed him to grow beyond any hope of containment. By punishing Loki, they drove him into alliance with their enemies. Yet this is not a tale of simple cause and effect, but of the deeper patterns that govern existence itself. The Norse understood that all things, even gods and worlds, must eventually come to an end. Ragnarok is not merely destruction, it is the necessary precursor to renewal. From the ashes of the old world, a new one will be born, greener and more beautiful than what came before. As the final moments before the great battle approach, the gods take their last actions in the old world. They share final words with loved ones, make peace with old enemies where possible, and prepare their souls for what is to come. Some, like Vidar, Odin's son who will survive to see the new world, are destined to carry forward the best of what was into what will be. Others, like Baldur, already dead but destined for resurrection, wait in Hel's realm for the cycle to complete itself. The approach of Ragnarok is felt even by the cosmic tree, Yggdrasil itself. The great ash trembles as the forces gathering for battle send vibrations through the roots and branches that connect all the realms. The dragon Nidhogg, which gnaws eternally at the tree's roots, redoubles his efforts as if sensing that his task of gradual destruction is about to be completed all at once by forces far greater than himself. In these final moments before the storm breaks, there is a terrible beauty in the certainty of what is to come. The gods face their doom with courage born not of hope for victory, but of determination to meet their fate with honor intact. They understand that their deaths will not be meaningless, for they will make possible the birth of a new and better world. In Norse thought, this is perhaps the highest form of heroism, to sacrifice oneself not for immediate gain, but for the hope of future generations. The stage is set, the players are in position, and the cosmic drama that will end one age and begin another is about to unfold. Ragnarok approaches with the inevitability of sunrise, bringing with it both ending and beginning, death and rebirth, twilight and dawn. The gods will fall, but they will fall as heroes, and from their sacrifice will come hope for all who follow after. As the sun sets on this long and winding tale, we arrive at the end, not just of Norse mythology, but of all cycles that must eventually close. The ashes have settled, the flames have died, and from the ruins of Ragnarok, something new stirs in the silence. We began this journey in the swirling chaos of Ginnungagap, where fire and ice first kissed to birth the cosmos. We watched as Odin and his brothers carved the world from Ymir's bones, as Yggdrasil stretched its roots deep and its branches high, connecting all the 9 realms in a web of destiny and fate. We walked among gods who were flawed and mortal, who laughed and wept, who loved and betrayed, who faced their doom with eyes wide open. The gods knew their fate. They saw it written in prophecy, whispered by the Norns, carved into the very fabric of time itself. Yet they did not cower. They did not surrender. They prepared. They fought. They chose courage over comfort, honor over safety, meaning over mere survival. In their defiance, they became eternal. Ragnarok was not an ending. It was a transformation. The twilight of the gods became the dawn of something new. From the ashes of the old world, green shoots emerged. Balder returned from the dead, his light undimmed. Vidar survived the wolf's jaws. The sons of Thor inherited their father's strength. 2 humans, Lif and Lifthrasir, emerged from Yggdrasil's embrace to repopulate the earth. The cycle turned as it always had, as it always would. This is the final lesson of Norse mythology, that endings are not failures, but foundations, that destruction is not defeat, but renewal, that even in the face of inevitable doom, there is choice, the choice to face the darkness with dignity, to fight for what matters, to plant seeds for those who will come after. The Vikings understood this. They carried these stories across stormy seas and into unknown lands. They faced their own twilights, the coming of Christianity, the end of their age, with the same courage their gods had shown. They knew that their time would pass, but they also knew that something of them would endure in the stories, in the courage, in the endless human capacity to begin again. And so Norse mythology lives on, not as ancient history, but as living truth. In every story of sacrifice and renewal, in every tale of underdogs facing impossible odds, in every moment when someone chooses to stand up rather than give in, the gods of Asgard walk among us still. Thor's hammer still strikes against injustice. Odin's ravens still carry wisdom on their wings. Freya's tears still fall for those we've lost, and they still turn to gold when touched by love. The tree still stands. Yggdrasil, the world tree, the axis around which all stories turn, remains rooted in the deep places of the human heart. Its branches still reach toward hope, its roots still drink from the wells of memory and wisdom and fate. And beneath its shade, the cycle continues, death and rebirth, ending and beginning, the eternal dance of destruction and creation that makes all life possible. This is how the story ends. This is how all stories end, not with an ending, but with a promise, not with silence, but with the whisper of new voices waiting to be heard. The gods may have fallen, but the stories remain. The myths may be ancient, but their truths are eternal. And somewhere, in the space between what was and what will be, Ragnarok and renewal, twilight and dawn, the entire story of Norse mythology begins again. In the beginning was the void. In the end is the void. And in between, in between is everything that matters. Every choice, every sacrifice, every moment of courage and love and loss that makes existence more than mere survival. The gods gave us these stories, not to worship them, but to remember who we are, not to bow down, but to stand up, not to fear the ending, but to write our own beginning. The wheel turns, the story continues. And somewhere in the distance, if you listen carefully, you can still hear the sound of Heimdall's horn, calling the brave to one more battle, one more chance to choose light over darkness, hope over despair, love over fear. As we reach the end of this vast mythological tapestry, it becomes clear that Norse mythology offers us far more than ancient stories of gods and monsters. These tales represent a profound meditation on the human condition, wrapped in the language of cosmic drama and divine adventure. The Norse worldview, with its unflinching acceptance of fate, combined with an unwavering commitment to honor and courage, provides timeless wisdom that resonates just as powerfully today as it did over 1,000 years ago. The cyclical nature of Norse mythology reveals perhaps its most important teaching, that endings are not truly endings, but transformations. From the primordial chaos of Ginnungagap emerged the ordered cosmos, yet this order was always temporary, always moving toward its own dissolution and renewal. This pattern repeats throughout the mythology, from the daily death and rebirth of the sun to the ultimate destruction and regeneration of the world itself. In this way, Norse mythology anticipates modern scientific understanding of cosmic cycles, stellar death and birth, and the constant flux that characterizes existence at every level. The gods themselves embody this paradox of permanence and change. Odin, the All-Father, sacrifices his eye for wisdom and hangs himself from Yggdrasil to gain knowledge of the runes. Yet even with all his accumulated wisdom, he cannot prevent Ragnarok. Thor's mighty hammer can shatter mountains and slay giants, yet it cannot hold back the tide of fate. Frigg's love for her son Balder is so powerful that she extracts oaths from all things not to harm him, yet she overlooks the humble mistletoe, and through this small oversight, her beloved son dies. These stories teach us that power, wisdom, and love, while valuable and necessary, have their limits. The gods' struggles mirror our own human experience of trying to control an ultimately uncontrollable universe. The relationship between the gods and humanity in Norse mythology is particularly complex and enlightening. Unlike many mythological traditions, where gods are distant and incomprehensible, the Norse gods are intimately involved with human affairs. They walk among mortals, form alliances with heroes, and share many of the same emotions and struggles. Odin wanders the world as a traveler, testing human hospitality and wisdom. Thor protects both gods and humans from the chaotic forces of the giants. The gods need human warriors to join them in the final battle of Ragnarok, while humans depend on divine protection and guidance. This interdependence reflects a sophisticated understanding of the relationship between the divine and mortal realms. The gods are not all-powerful beings who exist independently of creation. They are part of the cosmic order, subject to the same fundamental laws of fate that govern all existence. This creates a sense of shared destiny between gods and humans, a recognition that we are all part of the same cosmic story, facing the same ultimate questions about meaning, mortality, and purpose. The concept of fate in Norse mythology deserves particular attention because it differs significantly from fatalism as commonly understood. The Norse concept of fate, embodied by the Norns who weave the threads of destiny, does not eliminate free will or moral responsibility. Instead, it suggests that while certain broad patterns and ultimate outcomes may be predetermined, the specific details of how these patterns unfold depend on the choices and actions of individuals. Oh, the gods know that Ragnarok will come, but they do not simply resign themselves to this fate. They continue to fight against chaos, to protect what they value, and to live according to their principles, even knowing that their efforts cannot prevent the ultimate destruction. This understanding of fate encourages what we might call heroic realism, the ability to act with courage and purpose, even in the face of inevitable loss. The Norse heroes who fight at Ragnarok are not fighting to win in any conventional sense. They are fighting because fighting is what heroes do, because the act of resistance itself has meaning and value independent of its outcome. This philosophy has profound implications for how we might approach our own struggles and challenges, suggesting that meaning comes not from guaranteed success, but from the courage to act according to our values, regardless of the consequences. The themes of sacrifice and exchange that run throughout Norse mythology also offer important insights into the nature of growth and wisdom. Odin's sacrifices to gain knowledge, the gods' collective sacrifice of Tyr's hand to bind Fenrir, and the ongoing exchange of gifts and obligations that maintain social bonds all illustrate the principle that nothing valuable comes without cost. This is not merely about transactional relationships, but about the deeper truth that transformation requires giving up something of what we were to become something new. The feminine divine in Norse mythology, represented by figures like Frigg, Freya, and the Norns, embodies wisdom, fertility, and the power of fate itself. These goddesses are not merely consorts or helpers to the male gods, but possess their own spheres of influence and authority. Frigg's knowledge of fate, Freya's mastery of satyr magic, and the Norns' control over destiny all point to a recognition of feminine power that was perhaps more pronounced in Norse culture than in many other ancient societies. This balanced representation of divine masculine and feminine forces suggests a worldview that recognized the necessity of both principles in maintaining cosmic order. The giants in Norse mythology serve as more than mere antagonists. They represent the chaotic forces that must be held in check for ordered existence to be possible, yet they are also sources of wisdom, magic, and even marriage partners for the gods. This complex relationship between order and chaos, between the Aesir and the Jotuns, reflects a sophisticated understanding that creation requires both structure and wildness, both law and freedom. The giants cannot be completely defeated because they are part of the cosmic balance, but they must be continually opposed to prevent them from overwhelming the ordered world. The world tree, Yggdrasil, stands as perhaps the most powerful symbol in all of Norse mythology. This cosmic ash tree connects all the 9 realms, providing the structure that holds reality together. Its roots extend into the wells of wisdom, fate, and memory, while its branches reach into the heavens. The tree suffers constant damage from the creatures that gnaw at its roots and bark, yet it endures, providing stability and connection across all levels of existence. Yggdrasil represents the resilience of life itself, the ability to endure damage and loss while continuing to grow and provide support for others. The influence of Norse mythology extends far beyond its original cultural context. These stories have shaped literature, art, music, and popular culture for centuries, inspiring works from Wagner's Ring Cycle to Marvel's Thor comics. But more importantly, they have provided a framework for understanding fundamental human experiences. The search for meaning, the struggle against overwhelming odds, the importance of loyalty and honor, and the acceptance of mortality as part of life's larger pattern. In our contemporary world, facing our own versions of cosmic challenges, climate change, technological disruption, social upheaval. The Norse mythological perspective offers valuable guidance. It suggests that we cannot avoid all destruction and loss, but we can choose how we respond to these challenges. We can face them with courage, maintain our values under pressure, and work to ensure that something worthwhile survives and grows from whatever destruction we cannot prevent. The survival of figures like Balder, Vidar, and the human couple Lif and Lifthrasir after Ragnarok reminds us that even the most complete destruction is not so absolute. Seeds of renewal always remain, carrying the best of what came before into whatever comes next. This is not naive optimism, but a mature recognition that life finds a way to continue, to adapt, and to create new forms of beauty and meaning even after the most devastating losses. The Norse understanding of time as cyclical rather than linear also offers comfort and perspective. Our individual lives may be brief, but they are part of larger patterns that extend far beyond any single existence. The values we uphold, the relationships we nurture, and the courage we display become part of the ongoing story of existence itself. In this way, even our mortal lives participate in something approaching immortality. As we conclude this journey through the entire story of Norse mythology, we are left not with a simple moral or a neat resolution, but with a complex vision of existence that honors both its beauty and its tragedy. The Norse gods face their doom with open eyes and unflinching courage, not because they are certain of victory, but because they are certain of their values. They teach us that meaning comes not from avoiding struggle, but from how we engage with it, not from eliminating uncertainty, but from how we act in its presence. The great tree Yggdrasil still stands, its roots deep in the wells of wisdom and memory, its branches reaching toward infinite possibility. The cycle of destruction and renewal continues, each turning, bringing new challenges and new opportunities for growth. And somewhere in this vast cosmic story, our own small but significant part continues to unfold, connected to the great pattern of existence, carrying forward the eternal themes of courage, wisdom, sacrifice, and hope that the Norse myths have preserved for us across the centuries. And so we reach the end of our journey through the vast tapestry of Norse mythology, a story that began in the primordial void of Ginnungagap and culminates in the eternal cycle of death and rebirth that defines the Norse worldview. What we've witnessed is not merely a collection of ancient tales, but a profound meditation on the nature of existence itself. The Norse understood something fundamental about life that resonates even today, that order and chaos are not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of reality. From the moment ice and fire first collided to birth Ymir, we see this principle at work. The gods themselves embody this duality, creating order from chaos when they craft the world from Ymir's body, yet inevitably sowing the seeds of their own destruction through their actions and choices. Yggdrasil stands as the perfect metaphor for this worldview. The world tree connects all realms, representing the interconnectedness of existence, but it also trembles during Ragnarok, showing us that even the most fundamental structures are subject to change. The tree's survival and renewal after the apocalypse reminds us that destruction is not an ending, but a transformation. The gods' pursuit of wisdom, particularly Odin's relentless quest for knowledge, reveals another crucial aspect of Norse thought. that wisdom comes through sacrifice and suffering. Odin's hanging from Yggdrasil, his sacrifice of his eye, and his constant preparation for Ragnarok demonstrate that true understanding requires us to confront our limitations and mortality. The gods, despite their power, are not immortal, and this vulnerability makes them more human than divine. Loki's role as both creator and destroyer illustrates the necessary function of chaos in the cosmic order. Without his provocations and transgressions, the static world of Asgard would never progress toward its destined renewal. Even the most destructive forces serve a purpose in the grand design. The concept of fate, or word, weaves through every aspect of these myths, yet the gods never surrender to passive acceptance. They fight against their destiny, even while knowing the outcome, embodying a heroic ideal that values courage and honor above survival. This is perhaps the most powerful message of Norse mythology, that how we face our fate matters more than the fate itself. As we've seen, Ragnarok is not truly an ending, but a beginning. The surviving gods and humans inherit a world cleansed and renewed, ready to write new stories and face new challenges. This cyclical view of time suggests that every ending contains the seeds of a new beginning. Every death enables new life, and every destruction clears the way for fresh creation. The Norse myths remind us that we are all part of this eternal cycle, connected to each other and to the cosmos through invisible threads of fate and consequence. In our own lives, we face our personal Ragnaroks, our moments of crisis and transformation. The Norse gods show us that courage, sacrifice, and wisdom are the tools we need to navigate these challenges and emerge renewed on the other side.